Okay, well, thank you everyone for tuning in and welcome to CTO Talk. I am your host, Matt Ferrari. On this 30-minute program, we get to discuss the issues, the challenges, the opportunities that are impacting healthcare technology each and every day. You can always follow the show on Twitter at hashtag CTO Talk or follow me at MP Ferrari. With me, I'm really fortunate today to have John, the CTO and founder of Arterys, and today we're really going to dive in and discuss a lot of the kind of use cases, but also the requirements to get to market and compliance regulations around medical imaging in the cloud. And so, really excited to have John with us. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much.
Great. So let's dive right in. John, I'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and how you got involved in kind of the industry. Would you mind kind of sharing just a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'm actually an engineer by heart. I grew up kind of actually in mechanical engineering, and I went to grad school at Stanford and focused on more of computational engineering. I realized that I wanted to do something a little bit different and wanted to differentiate myself from others. And so I thought it was going to be being an academic, and I thought I'd set myself along that course. And unfortunately, being around Stanford, things change, and there's something called the Hoover Tower syndrome, which basically means everyone at Stanford is extremely entrepreneurial, and you kind of get sucked into this vortex a bit. So while I was finishing up my last year of my PhD in actually computational fluid dynamics, one of my co-founders kind of knocked on my door, and he had sleep apnea, and he actually came to me saying, "Hey, can you cure my issues?" And I said, "Well, I'll give it a try." And that's how it all started. It really started to kind of help him. We're really aligned with this vision of precision medicine and using simulations or computation to try to help people. And that's kind of where our mission and vision came from. And kind of fast forward 8 years now, we are where we are today.
That's great. Yeah. So would you mind kind of introducing us to your company just to kind of set the stage of what we're going to talk about today?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my company is called Arterys, and Arterys is a company that's focused on building a cloud platform for medical imaging that offers basically applications that include machine learning at scale. And what we're really focused on right now is building out specific applications that improve workflow, specifically in radiology that deal with medical images, primarily CT and MR. But also trying to incorporate and build out the infrastructure to support other AI applications or vendors, as well as infrastructure to support cloud-based viewing, which is both concepts are actually extremely new.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Out of curiosity, I know that we're going to want to dig today into kind of product, requirements and getting things to market. As you thought about the market problem, I'm a big fan, in my CTO role of really starting out with the market problem kind of in that pragmatic product, sense. Out of curiosity, how did you guys come up with the idea and what market problem were you looking to solve?
Yeah, when we first started, we actually realized that sleep apnea was not a very good market because it just required a change in workflow. And I'll emphasize the word workflow so many times because it is critical to make anything be successful in medical imaging, because a radiologist or actually any physician doesn't want to change what they're doing. Unfortunately, in sleep apnea, we needed a CT scan in order to actually simulate airflow, and that's not part of a standard assessment. What's typically done is a sleep study. So we actually interviewed over 100 physicians from all over the world to try to identify where there's a need for data-driven medicine, where there's a need for compute, and where there's an alignment with all of our skills. I came from the technology side, Fabian came from the business side, and we needed the clinical side. And so we met our two other co-founders that were working on a new technology called 4D Flow, which at the time was a research project. And we actually, over the next 3 years, commercialized that technology. We licensed from the university, and we went to market with GE Healthcare. So that was an amazing ride. Not many people successfully partner with GE and go to market. So that's where it all started. And from there, we kind of built out the platform to be able to support that use case, which was actually a very complicated use case, and then grew our applications and the platform.
Excellent. Yeah, no, that's quite a story about getting to market. Absolutely. As we think about cloud adoption, as I was kind of studying, Arterys, I was thinking about, wow, a world's first medical imaging cloud platform. It's something that I'm dealing with every day in my role as well as cloud adoption. And we both see kind of how healthcare struggles with, data sharing and interoperability. So thinking about cloud adoption, healthcare moving to cloud in droves, still struggling with technology adoption at the rate of other industries. John, you said you kind of came from the tech side. I'd love to hear from you. Where do you see some of the, adoption inertia? And, do you think that fear is based on myth or reality?
Yeah. Specifically, what I'd say first is I want to define what cloud means, because I can tell you every other in the space uses cloud times. It depends on the vendor, but it really means different things. Most of the time when you see cloud, it means remotely hosted. When you look at big companies in the space, even Epic, they have remotely hosted solutions. That's very different than what I call cloud native, which is running a platform globally that's connected and either single database or basically the architecture is created in a way that is most likely on a public cloud, but that the system is constantly one system. And the way I'd like to think about it is like Gmail. We went from Microsoft Exchange servers to kind of the future, which was Gmail, one system that you actually do the version is actually running, and you refresh and you get a new version all the time. And that's SaaS. We all know it that way, but that concept is very new. I can tell you when we went to market back in 2013 and went to security reviews to try to sell this, just pushed out. And the first question was, do you do cloud? And the answer was no. Like most of the folks that hold these key positions as CIO, CMIO, or chief security officer, or whoever, I can tell you it was no, no, no. We had to create a unique system to de-identify the data prior to it leaving the hospital network. And we actually were able to convince folks that the public cloud was safe with this technology. And so that's what allowed us between the years of 2014 to 2017 to actually start selling. And I can tell you now, things are really changing. In the past year to about a year and a half, a lot of places now have a separate security assessment form for cloud, and even the VA, even the tough places. And so I'm excited for that. And so going back to your question around inertia, where that's coming from, why cloud? I think one that people don't realize is that when we talk about AI, there's going to be huge loads, like huge compute loads, IOPS, or we need resources to run these models. I had a company that came to me and said, I need 8 hours to process a brain segmentation model. It's like, good luck trying to run that on PAX. We're seeing more and more use cases of studies that are super large in size, either mammography, tomography, 4D applications that just aren't supported with current infrastructure like PACS.
Yeah, no, I see that as well. As I talk to healthcare organizations, a lot of the conversations, once you get past security and compliance and you help them understand, that some of these public cloud providers, they're investing more than you could ever imagine in security, compliance, AI, and analytics, big data, machine learning, these kind of things. Once you get them past that, then it comes down to benefits around scalability, agility, just pure time to market, these kind of things. Out of curiosity, what do you think needs to happen, as you think about the broader healthcare market? What do you think needs to happen to continue to increase cloud adoption?
Yeah, so there's two pieces. One is the network. Unfortunately, in places in rural America, or even in large metropolitan areas, there isn't enough investment on the network side. And when we're going into China, it's horrendous. So not only in connecting fiber, for example, but also setting up the network infrastructure where there's no single point of failure. I think those two pieces, actually maybe even a third one, which is a great way for the hospitals to connect to these public clouds in a secure fashion. Like the fact that Arterys has to create technology to send data from their existing storage layer to whatever public cloud it seems backwards for me. I think the public cloud folks need to develop technology to just start pulling data. And I think going back to my point of no single point of failure, with a couple $1,000s, you could buy 2 switches, two routers, two ISPs or two fiber lines and do it right. But I'll ask you, Matt, what do you think is the percentage of hospitals that have no single point of failure within their network?
Oh my goodness, it's darn close to zero. It's darn close to zero. Yeah, and candidly, as hospitals and providers are not only struggling with CapEx to OpEx, and they're struggling with really low margins, but they've had so much change. Hospitals by nature, and my own family doesn't even know this, and I have to educate them all the time. Hospitals by nature are constantly merging, changing hands, becoming part of other organizations, these kind of things. So as you think about network, the topology, even as it relates to some of the carriers they use, are incredibly complex. And actually, if you really talk to a lot of CIOs, they're not well known.
Nope, absolutely. And the way I like to think about it is a lot of these hospitals can't attract the talent or of the security engineers or the IT folks. And so it's a real dearth of expertise in setting up the networks or even the security layer. Folks like Amazon, Google, Apple, they can attract top-end security folks or network folks. The problem is these hospitals can't keep them.
Right. No, I agree completely. One of the leaders that I met with fairly recently, as we kind of think about machine learning and AI, they have a need to hire data scientists, and the numbers are staggering how many data scientists they need for some of their projects. But he admitted, how am I going to get data scientists to work in the basement of my hospital, right? How can I possibly get that to happen? And that's something that, he then had to go out and think about SaaS solutions and partners.
Yeah. And I can tell you, if you set up your system where those machine learning scientists can stay at home in their pajamas and work on really cool problems, you can attract them, even though they're in some rural area.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's actually dig into ML. You obviously so much potential for innovation. I actually just got back from AWS reInvent, and so much of even their own launches and announcements are around ML and AI. And you're leading, deep learning teams at Arterys, and I'd love to, understand a little bit more there. You're working on kind of demonstrating the power of cloud medical imaging analytics in oncology, cardiology, these kind of things. So let's talk about what Arterys means to healthcare and kind of how machine learning and AI are changing the way that we think about, medical imaging. Would you mind kind of walking me through that?
Sure. So one thing at a high level that I'll mention is people talk about the hype of AI, and I actually don't see it. I think people are talking about it everywhere, but the most, I guess, it's impacting is potentially some early stage medical students that haven't had the time to research what machine learning means and how it could impact their careers. They've even done studies to show that radiologists that are either residents or fellows or early in their career are actually not scared of machine learning, of replacing them. They're embracing it because they realize that, I think, that short term machine learning, AI, deep learning is going to be augmenting them. And I think, honestly, over the last year, everybody is using the word augment, and people are less and less scared. So that's great. And we're not the only ones pushing that. When you go to any talk today, I think that's what everyone is saying. It's like, hey, nobody feels that a radiologist is going to be replaced anytime soon. And it's really let's leverage this tool, this technology, to help in day-to-day tedious tasks that are error prone. So that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit. Is let's start with things that are tractable, as opposed to trying to say that with AI we're going to cure cancer, or with AI we're going to predict outcomes of patients with whatever data. So our strategy at Arterys has been, let's focus on the workflow and focus on what is taking the most amount of time and what it has the most variability. And so when we look at the applications, let's say within cardiac imaging, I'll give you one use case of right now with a cardiac MRI, the actual scan takes potentially up to an hour. Fast scans are in 20 minutes to half an hour. Then you got to post-process these images, and you have to literally draw circles to define the endocardium, the epicardium, like the borders of the heart, which can take, if you're annotating across all the phases of the heart cycle, 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And literally, it's the most tedious amount of work, and nobody likes doing it. So that's the perfect example where we've taken a 45-minute task and reduced it down to a couple seconds. And what's unique about our solution is that we allow the user to modify, to edit, or to override. And I think that's one key piece that a lot of machine learning companies miss, is that actually clinicians are extremely good. There are several experts in the field, and trying to match their expertise is actually very difficult and challenging. And so there needs to be a way to override when the algorithm fails. And I'll tell you, Matt, it'll fail all the time, or not, it'll fail 100% of the time within 1 year. And so even when people say, hey, we're 95% accurate algorithm, like if you're 95% accurate and missing 5% of cases, that's horrendous. So that's why there needs to be oversight in the short term. And so I'm always so concerned about these algorithms that are black box, which are sending a response back to their PACS to saying, okay, we found a lung nodule, but there's no way to say whether that's correct or not, and there's no way to inform the algorithm that, hey, go back, tell your developer to just retrain. And so we focused a lot on that workflow of integrating the AI right into a viewer, our universal viewer, which allows them to incorporate that result and validate that with viewing an image. So that's kind of the key differentiator versus just literally there's 150 startups that are creating algorithms, but there's no real mechanism for that algorithm to be ingested into the clinical workflow. And maybe I'd love to spend like 30 seconds talking about an analogy, which actually Dr. Paul Chang from Chicago used, and it's a fantastic analogy. It's right now we're building like a sports car or a Tesla, and we have great technology to build a Tesla. What's missing is gas and roads, and the gas is data and annotated data, and the roads is the workflow piece, is being able to integrate into that workflow. And unfortunately, the gas and roads are missing.
Yeah, no, I agree, and it's so interesting. But before I forget, if you're just tuning in, Matt Ferrari of CTO Talk, we're talking with John Axerio Cilies, CTO and co-founder of Arterys. We're talking about, right now we're talking about machine learning and some of the power there. It's interesting, your analogy, because I was thinking through similar last week. Amazon, of course, launched their next kind of ML extension of Comprehend called Comprehend Medical, and it's actually, to your point about 95% there. It was that's what's been on my mind lately. It's all around reducing unstructured data, anomalies inside of the environment, and being able to show things like from unstructured data inside of an EMR, what is a prescription, a common prescription look like, or what common side effects has a patient had? Because, what most of folks not in the medical field don't know is that, this data lives inside of unstructured data and really has no bearing many times on a doctor's visit or a hospital's visit, simply because the doctor or nurse probably doesn't have access to that old data or doesn't have hours to read through multiple EMRs. And so a lot of it's become around how to aggregate that data. But one of the things that I loved about what you just said was you still need an override for all of the intelligent human beings out there that, continue to provide value and hands-on experience in healthcare. And all that to ask you, John, a question around education. This is clearly a very new market, and folks have been used to, kind of the old ways of PACS imaging and all these kind of things. I'm curious, how do you, and actually how can we best educate the market on some of these, kind of new use cases?
So the first I would say is right from the ground up. Like, I think there needs to be focus on the residents, focusing on the fellowships, focusing on the med schools. I'm thinking on education around machine learning. And it doesn't have to be a 3-month course, but I think what we're realizing in the field is that people don't know what machine learning is. Everyone uses it in hype talks. I think literally spending 5 minutes with each potential doctor physician would be very important, and patients actually. There needs to be like mechanisms so that we're going to educate other folks. I think on the education piece, I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that it's hard to change practice. What we'll need, especially as we adopt machine learning is mechanisms of incorporating annotation in their daily workflow. Because right now they're not doing it well. You mentioned the EMR case. When we look at what radiologists do is that they use a dictaphone to just transcribe whatever they're seeing, and it goes into a sentence. But there's historically not been literally a table of structured data. So there's folks trying to move us in this direction. You mentioned at AWS reInvents the ability to extract structure, but that's just for text. Medical imaging is pixel based. And so there needs to be a mechanism where we collect annotated data and know when the overrides were done. And I think that goes back to the education of we need to change practice a tiny bit to say, hey, instead of doing a dictaphone, perhaps right in the PACS viewer or universal viewer, there's when you're looking at an image, they have to click on a number from 1, 2, and 3 that says that describes whatever they're looking at, or examples like that hopefully don't add clicks or slow them down, that provide valuable inputs to help the systems get smarter. Because I can tell you there's this fantastic idea of democratization of healthcare, and the only way we're going to do that is by collecting all the data from multiple sites, multiple countries, multiple continents, multiple vendors to get a diversity of data that is required to make these algorithms go from 95% to 99%. And I think it is going to take education into on the cloud side, on the sharing of data side, on the annotation side to get us there.
Yeah, I agree. I haven't heard the take of kind of getting into the residents and kind of starting from the ground up. I really like that actually. And switching gears, you guys are obviously steeped, and you have to be, in compliance and regulation. And even my own company is doing a lot of work overseas with folks that are concerned about GDPR and really focusing on demonstrating compliance on dashboards in our world. I'm curious, as you think about internationalization of healthcare, how top of mind is that for yourself, and what does that mean for your business?
Yeah, so it's interesting when you look historically at some of the big players in the space. They focused either on the U.S. market or on the European markets, but few have been able to have a full global presence. The challenge for us was we went into the market with a use case that is fairly niche. It was started with cardiac imaging, and I can tell you all the requests came from 100 different countries. And so what's great about a cloud platform is that we can have a single system. So deployment is very simple and easy. The problem is compliance and regulatory. So that was one of our core focuses right from the beginning, is focusing on what sort of regulatory on the medical side, so medical device regulatory, because people use that term in different ways. Since we're supporting in the diagnosis, we are a class 2 medical device, and so primarily focusing on the FDA and CE marking in Europe allowed us to broaden, and now we're actually regulated in 98 countries. Now the other piece is on the privacy and security piece, which has been such a difficult world to navigate, specifically in cloud. And so what we typically do in every country we enter, I'll engage local counsel and spend tens of thousands of dollars on reviewing our own end user license agreements and any local privacy laws to modify, to make sure that we have the rights, like let's say SOPs or procedures internally for handling data. So it's a huge pain, but I can tell you, if you spend the dollars, you can have a global system, and it does slow you down.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's one of the many things that we're running into as well. And speaking of regulation, you guys sought and received FDA approval, and congratulations on that. As you think about requirements and how you got to market, would you mind kind of walking the audience through that process and the lessons learned from it?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, we were one of the first companies to have FDA clearance on a cloud-based deep learning product, and we have over 6 FDA clearances today. Actually, the first one wasn't even machine learning based. It was purely about more of a PACS type solution. With learning or deep learning, the stakes are a little bit different, because and that's kind of goes back to now, for example, if we are now trying to detect lung nodules versus trying to detect heart borders, unfortunately, the risk for lung nodules is so much higher. But with lung nodules, the risk is higher. There's something called CAD, computer-aided diagnostics, that have been out there for years. So the bar is very high, and that's where it's taken much more interaction with the FDA, with pre-subs and so forth, that where they're confirming our clinical study or our clinical assessment strategy. So, and that typically involves running multiple sites, multiple readers, multiple studies to actually prove that either you're saving time in terms of reading the exam, but while also ensuring the same level of quality with the Arterys solution versus without. So for the higher risk devices, it was really focusing on that clinical assessment. And if we're proving it through these clinical studies, then the FDA is very happy, and they're honestly fantastic to work with. Over the past 2 or 3 years, they've changed their position. I don't know if they've changed internally, but they have been much more open to interact, to give feedback, and to basically work with us to bring this technology to market, as opposed to just closing the door shut.
Wow, that's actually a great learning, because it's not the from the outside in, that's not the impression that many folks in the healthcare market historically have had. So that's great to hear. I know we're running out of time. I'd love to kind of ask a final question, if I could, John. In your opinion, would you mind sharing with the audience kind of the most important thing that CTOs in healthcare today can communicate with other members of their C-suite in terms of guiding their organization to really make that transformation, whether it's, agility, interoperability, scaling? What advice would you give them as they go through this journey?
I would say, unfortunately, this is not a technology problem. I think everything or what it takes to actually bring a product to market is a people problem, and a problem related to infrastructure and trying to change mentality, change perception. I think that's been my biggest learning, is if there's mechanisms to, for example, just adopting AI, like within your C-suite, there could be some resistance, or potentially there could be just a small task force that at the VP level that says, okay, go figure out AI and we need to have it because everyone's asking for it. That's not the way to approach it. The way I see it approached, specifically cloud and AI, is there needs to be buy-in all the way from the CEO down, but also from the ground up. That comes from education. That comes from proving the ROI around these two investments. And ultimately, there's been a great study shown by McKinsey to show the companies and hospitals that invest all in on AI actually benefit the most, and have there's clear examples of cost savings. The more that you have a strategy from the full entire C-suite, as opposed to just some vertical being responsible for that. I'll end with that.
No, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. As I think about, verticals within even large healthcare systems, that's extremely helpful. I've seen a lot of healthcare organizations trying to break down silos there. And I think the more we can do that, the better. So John, thanks for taking the time with me today. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you have a comment about today's episode, check out and follow hashtag CTO Talk on Twitter, or follow me at MP Ferrari. You can always learn more about CTO Talk at healthcarenowradio.com or at cleardata.com. And I am Matt Ferrari. Until we talk again, have a wonderful week.